You think you can just destroy my life and walk away? I screamed at Blake, my voice echoing through the empty church vestibule. The white silk of my wedding dress felt suffocating as I clutched it, trying to process what I had just witnessed. My maid of honor's lipstick was still smeared across his mouth, and the image was burned into my memory like a brand. My name is Roberta Hayes, and I am 27 years old. 4 hours ago, I was supposed to become Roberta Collins, but instead, I caught my fiancé of 3 years in a passionate embrace with my best friend Jessica behind the altar. The same woman who had helped me pick out this dress, who had thrown my bachelorette party, who had promised to stand by my side through everything. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. I had always been the type of person who believed in fairy tale endings. Growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, I worked as a marketing coordinator for Sundale Financial, dreaming of the perfect wedding, the perfect husband, the perfect life. Blake seemed to fit all those dreams when we met at a company mixer 2 years ago. He was charming, successful, and everything my mother had hoped I would find. But as I stood there in my ruined wedding dress, watching him stammer through pathetic excuses, I realized that sometimes the fairy tale is just an illusion. "Roberta, please, it didn't mean anything," Blake pleaded, reaching for my hand. "It was just nerves, just a moment of weakness." I yanked my hand away, feeling something dark and cold settle in my chest. A moment of weakness? I saw you, Blake. I saw both of you. This wasn't some accident. Jessica, still in her bridesmaid dress, had the audacity to step forward. "Roberta, you have to understand." "I don't have to understand anything." I cut her off, my voice trembling with rage. "You were supposed to be my best friend. You were supposed to support me." The church was filled with our families and friends, all waiting for a ceremony that would never happen. My parents had spent thousands of dollars on this day, and my father had taken time off from his construction business to walk me down the aisle. Now, I had to face them all and explain that their daughter's perfect day had turned into a nightmare. As I gathered my skirts and prepared to leave, Blake grabbed my arm one last time. "Where are you going to go? What are you going to do?" I looked at him with all the contempt I could muster. Anywhere but here. The ominous weight of his question settled over me as I realized I truly had no idea what came next. The drive to my cousin Penny's farm outside Clarksville took 2 hours, giving me plenty of time to replay every moment of my relationship with Blake and question every decision I had made. My car was still decorated with wedding ribbons and tin cans that clanked with each mile, a cruel reminder of the celebration that never was. I had called Penny from the church parking lot, barely able to speak through my tears. "Roberta, what's wrong, honey?" Penny's voice had been warm but cautious. "My wedding. It's over. Blake cheated on me with Jessica. I need somewhere to stay, just for a few days until I figure things out." There had been a long pause before Penny responded. "Well, I suppose you can come here, but you know I don't have much room in the main house. Gerald and I are in the middle of renovating, and the boys are home from college." Penny had always been the practical one in our family. 3 years older than me, she had married her high school sweetheart Gerald and moved to his family's farm right after graduation. They raised cattle and grew soybeans, living a simple life that I had often envied during my corporate struggles. She had 2 teenage sons, Dylan and Caleb, who were both home for the summer. When I pulled into their gravel driveway at nearly midnight, Penny was waiting on the porch with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time since leaving the church, I felt truly safe. "The main house is chaos right now," she explained, leading me toward a small building across the yard. "But there's my old pottery studio out back. It's not much, but it has electricity and running water. You can stay there until you get back on your feet." The pottery studio was a converted garage that Penny had used briefly during her artistic phase 5 years earlier, before the demands of farm life and raising teenagers took over. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung in the corners like abandoned dreams. Clay-stained tools sat exactly where she had left them, and bags of dried clay were stacked against one wall. "I know it's not ideal," Penny said, watching my face for a reaction. "But it's private, and you won't be in our way while we're dealing with the construction." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. "It's perfect, Penny. Thank you." She showed me where the bathroom was and helped me bring in my overnight bag from the car. As she prepared to leave, she turned back with a serious expression. "Roberta, I'm sorry about what happened today, but maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Blake never seemed right for you anyway." After she left, I sat on the dusty couch and finally allowed myself to cry. The pottery wheel in the corner caught my eye, and I wondered what it would feel like to create something beautiful from nothing more than clay and water. The next morning brought the cruel reality of my situation into sharp focus. I woke up on the uncomfortable couch with my wedding dress still on, my makeup smeared, and my life in complete ruins. The morning sunlight streaming through the dirty windows illuminated the pottery studio in all its neglected glory, and I realized this was now my home. My phone had been buzzing all night with calls and texts from family members, friends, and even Blake. I scrolled through the messages with growing anger and embarrassment. My mother had sent 17 texts asking where I was and what had happened. My father had called 6 times. Even my boss from Sundale Financial had left a voicemail asking if I was okay, since I was supposed to be on my honeymoon. But it was Blake's messages that truly infuriated me. "Baby, please come home. We can work this out. It was just pre-wedding jitters. I love you, not her." Each word felt like salt in an open wound. I turned off my phone and walked outside to clear my head. The farm was peaceful in the early morning light, with cattle grazing in distant fields and the sound of roosters crowing. Penny was already up, hanging laundry on a line near the main house. She waved but gave me space, understanding that I needed time to process. When I returned to the studio, something drew me to the pottery wheel. I had never worked with clay before, but I remembered watching Penny years ago when she was passionate about it. There was something meditative about the idea of shaping something with your hands, of creating order from chaos. I found a bag of clay that wasn't completely dried out and managed to wedge it into a workable consistency. My first attempts were disasters. The clay collapsed, flew off the wheel, or refused to cooperate with my inexperienced hands. But there was something therapeutic about the process, something that quieted the screaming thoughts in my head. By afternoon, Penny checked on me and found me covered in clay, my wedding dress now completely ruined, but my mind finally calm for the first time in 24 hours. "You look better," she observed, leaning against the doorframe. "I feel better," I admitted. "There's something about this that makes sense, even when nothing else does." Penny smiled. "Clay doesn't lie to you. It doesn't cheat on you. It just responds to what you give it." That evening, as I cleaned up the studio and changed into normal clothes, I made a decision. I called my boss and asked for an extended leave of absence. I called my parents and assured them I was safe, but needed time alone. And I called my landlord and arranged to have my belongings moved to storage. For the first time since catching Blake with Jessica, I felt like I was taking control of my life, instead of just reacting to what had happened to me. 3 weeks into my stay at the pottery studio, I had developed a routine that kept me sane. I woke with the sunrise, worked with clay until my hands were too tired to continue, then helped Penny with farm chores in the afternoon. The physical work and creative outlet were healing me in ways I hadn't expected. My pottery skills were improving rapidly. What started as therapeutic destruction had evolved into something more intentional. I found myself creating pieces that reflected my emotional journey. Bowls with jagged edges that somehow still held water. Vases with deliberate cracks that looked like tears. Sculptures that captured the feeling of betrayal in clay form. But my peaceful refuge was threatened when Blake showed up unannounced on a Thursday morning. I was at the pottery wheel, working on a piece that had been giving me trouble for days, when I heard his car in the driveway. My stomach dropped as I recognized the sound of his BMW engine. Through the window, I watched him get out of his car wearing his expensive suit and looking completely out of place on the farm. "Roberta, I know you're in there," he called, knocking on the studio door. "We need to talk." I considered ignoring him, but I knew he wouldn't leave until I faced him. I wiped my clay-covered hands on a towel and opened the door, blocking his entrance with my body. "What do you want, Blake?" He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his usually clean-shaven face. "I want my fiancé back. I want to fix this." "I'm not your fiancé anymore," I said flatly. "And there's nothing to fix. You destroyed it." "Come on, Roberta. You can't seriously want to live like this." He gestured at my clay-stained clothes and the rustic surroundings. "You're living in a shed, playing with mud. This isn't you." His words stung because they echoed my own fears. Was I just hiding from reality? Was this pottery obsession just a way to avoid dealing with my real life? "Maybe this is more me than I ever knew," I replied. But my voice lacked conviction. Blake sensed my uncertainty and pressed his advantage. "Jessica and I are over. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness before the biggest commitment of my life. You know me, Roberta. You know I love you." For a moment, I wavered. 3 years of shared history, plans we had made, the life we had built together. It all seemed to pull at me. Maybe I could forgive him. Maybe we could start over. But then I looked at the pottery wheel behind me, at the piece I had been working on, a bowl that represented finding beauty in brokenness. The clay had taught me that some things, once shattered, become stronger when rebuilt differently. "No," I said firmly. "We're done, Blake. What you did with Jessica wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice. And now I'm making mine." His face flushed with anger. "Fine. But don't come crawling back when you realize you've thrown away the best thing that ever happened to you. You think this pottery nonsense is going to support you? You think anyone cares about your little hobby?" After he left, his words haunted me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was deluding myself about my pottery having any value beyond personal therapy. I had been creating pieces for weeks, but I had no idea if they were actually good or just emotionally significant to me. That night, I sat in the studio surrounded by my creations and wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The doubt Blake had planted in my mind festered for days. I found myself questioning every piece I made, wondering if I was truly talented or just processing grief in an expensive way. The clay that had once felt like salvation now felt like self-indulgence. Everything changed when Penny's neighbor, Eleanor Blackwood, stopped by the farm to borrow some tools. Eleanor was a retired art teacher from Austin Peay State University who had moved to the countryside to paint landscapes. She was in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. "Is that Penny's old pottery studio?" she asked, nodding toward my refuge. "Yes, I'm staying there temporarily," I explained, walking her over to see what Gerald needed from his workshop. Eleanor paused at the studio window, peering inside at my work displayed on makeshift shelves. Her expression grew serious as she studied my pieces. "Whose work is this?" she asked quietly. "Mine," I admitted, feeling embarrassed. "I just started a few weeks ago. I know they're not very good." Eleanor turned to look at me with surprise. "Not very good? Child, may I come inside and look more closely?" I reluctantly let her into the studio, watching nervously as she examined my pieces with the critical eye of someone who understood art. She picked up a bowl I had made the day after Blake's visit, one where I had deliberately incorporated the cracks and imperfections into the design. "This is extraordinary," she said softly. "The emotional honesty in this piece. It's raw and powerful. You're working through something deeply personal, aren't you?" I found myself telling Eleanor the whole story. The wedding day betrayal, my escape to the farm, my discovery of pottery as a way to process my pain. She listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions about my creative process. "Have you shown these to anyone else?" she asked. "No, just Penny and her family. I don't even know if they're actually any good, or if I'm just finding meaning in them because they're mine." Eleanor smiled. "Trust me, I've seen thousands of student pieces over the years. These aren't student work. These are the creations of someone who has found their authentic voice through suffering. The question is, what are you going to do with this gift?" She suggested I photograph my pieces and create a small portfolio. There's healing in art, but there's also power in sharing that healing with others who need it. The idea terrified me. What if I put myself out there and failed? What if Blake was right about my pottery being meaningless? But Eleanor's enthusiasm was infectious. She offered to help me document my work properly, and even suggested I apply to show a few pieces at a local art fair in Clarksville. "Art isn't just about technique," she explained. "It's about connection, about making people feel something they couldn't feel before. Your work does that." That weekend, Eleanor returned with her professional camera and proper lighting equipment. We spent the entire day photographing my pieces, and seeing them through the lens, I began to understand what she saw in them. Each piece told a story of transformation, of finding beauty in brokenness, of rebuilding from ruins. When we finished, Eleanor looked at the photos on her camera and smiled. "Roberta, you have no idea what you've created here. These pieces don't just show technical skill. They show healing and process. They show hope." For the first time since my wedding day disaster, I felt something other than anger or sadness. I felt possibility. Armed with Eleanor's encouragement and a small portfolio of my work, I decided to take a leap of faith. The Clarksville Arts and Crafts Fair was held monthly in the town square, and Eleanor had connections that could get me a booth for the upcoming September event. But first, I needed more inventory. If I was going to present my work publicly, I wanted a cohesive collection that told a complete story. I began working with renewed purpose, creating pieces that explored themes of betrayal, healing, and rebirth. I developed what I came to think of as my Broken Beautiful series, pottery that intentionally incorporated flaws and imperfections as part of the design. Bowls with metallic veins running through deliberate cracks, reminiscent of the Japanese art of kintsugi. Vases with asymmetrical shapes that somehow achieved perfect balance. Sculptures that looked shattered, but held together through the sheer force of artistic will. Word of my work began to spread through Eleanor's network before I even made my public debut. She had shared photos with former colleagues and art world contacts, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. "I have a friend who runs a gallery in Nashville," Eleanor told me one afternoon as I worked on a particularly challenging piece. "She wants to see your work in person." My hands froze on the clay. "A gallery? Eleanor, I've been doing this for 2 months. I'm not ready for galleries." "Art doesn't wait for you to feel ready," she replied. "Sometimes you have to trust that your authentic voice is enough." The gallery owner, Victoria Holbrook, drove out to the farm the following week. She was a sophisticated woman in her 40s who ran Luminous Gallery, one of Nashville's most respected contemporary art spaces. I was terrified as she examined my pieces, her face revealing nothing. "Tell me about this one," she said, pointing to a large bowl with golden veins running through intentional breaks in the clay. "It's about finding beauty in damage," I explained nervously, "about how sometimes the broken places become the strongest and most beautiful parts of who we are." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "And this?" She indicated a sculpture that looked like a heart that had been shattered and reassembled with visible seams. "That's about rebuilding after betrayal, about choosing to love again even when you've been hurt." She spent 2 hours in the studio, asking questions about my process and my inspiration. When she finally spoke, her words changed everything. "I want to offer you a solo show," she said simply. 3 months from now, in December." We'll call it Healing Clay, Beauty Born from Brokenness. I nearly dropped the piece I was holding. A solo show? But I've never shown anywhere before. I've never even sold a piece. Sometimes the most powerful art comes from artists who haven't learned to doubt themselves yet, Victoria replied. Your work speaks to something universal, the human capacity to transform pain into beauty. That's not something you can teach. That evening, as I called my parents to share the incredible news, I realized how far I had come from the broken woman who had fled her wedding 4 months ago. I was no longer just processing my trauma. I was transforming it into something that could help others heal. But even as excitement coursed through me, I couldn't shake the feeling that my biggest challenges still lay ahead. Creating art in solitude was one thing. Sharing it with the world was entirely another. The morning of the Arts and Crafts Fair arrived with perfect September weather and my stomach in knots. I had spent weeks preparing my booth display, carefully arranging pieces to tell the visual story of my journey from heartbreak to healing. Eleanor had helped me create professional signage and price tags, transforming my therapeutic hobby into a legitimate artistic enterprise. As vendors set up around me in the Clarksville town square, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. My pieces looked so personal, so raw, sitting there for strangers to judge and potentially reject. But when the fair opened at 9 a.m., something magical happened. People didn't just walk past my booth, they stopped, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. A middle-aged woman picked up one of my broken, beautiful bowls, and tears came to her eyes. "This speaks to me," she said quietly. "I've been going through a difficult divorce, and this looks like how I feel inside." She became my first customer, purchasing not just the bowl but also a small sculpture about rebuilding after loss. Word spread quickly through the fair, and soon I had a crowd gathered around my booth. People shared their own stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and healing as they examined my pieces. A therapist named Dr. Patricia Williams stopped by and spent an hour discussing my work. "I've never seen pottery that captures the therapeutic process so beautifully," she said. "Would you be open to creating pieces specifically for my practice? I have clients who struggle to express their healing journey, and your work could help them." By noon, I had sold half my inventory and taken orders for custom pieces. More importantly, I had connected with people who understood the emotional journey my art represented. Each sale felt like validation that my pain had been transformed into something meaningful. The success at the arts fair opened doors I never could have imagined. Dr. Williams introduced me to other therapists in the area, and suddenly I had a waiting list of clients seeking custom healing pottery, designed specifically for their therapeutic journeys. I began creating pieces for people recovering from addiction, processing grief, surviving abuse, and rebuilding after life-altering trauma. Each commission required me to listen deeply to their stories and translate their emotional needs into clay. My breakthrough moment came when a local news station heard about the heartbreak artist creating therapeutic pottery on a farm outside Clarksville. The reporter, Jennifer Knox, arrived expecting a simple human interest story, but left with something much more profound. "I've never met an artist who talks about their work the way you do," she said after filming for an hour. "You're not just making pottery, you're facilitating healing." The news segment aired on a Friday night and changed everything. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing constantly with orders from across Tennessee and neighboring states. Art galleries in Memphis, Knoxville, and even Atlanta were calling to inquire about my availability for shows. The Nashville gallery show Victoria had proposed was still 2 months away, but I already had enough advance orders to justify hiring help. Penny's son Dylan, who had always been artistic, began assisting me with basic pottery prep work after school. But the most unexpected call came from a producer at a national lifestyle television show. "We've seen the local news coverage and your work online," she explained. "We'd love to feature your story on our show. You're exactly what people need to see right now. Proof that crisis can become creativity." As I hung up the phone, I realized that my escape to this dusty pottery studio had become something far greater than I had ever dared to hope. 6 months after my wedding day disaster, Penny knocked on the studio door with a mixture of curiosity and concern. She had been patient with my extended stay, but I knew she needed her space back for her own family projects. "Roberta, we need to talk about," she began, then stopped mid-sentence as she took in the scene before her. A line of customers stretched from the studio door across the farmyard and nearly to the main road. People held numbers like at a deli, waiting patiently for their turn to commission custom pieces or purchase from my limited ready-made inventory. A hand-painted sign read, "Healing Clay Studio, Custom Therapeutic Pottery by Appointment." Inside the transformed studio, my pieces were displayed on professional shelving, and a small seating area allowed clients to discuss their needs in comfort. Dylan was managing the customer queue while I worked with a woman who was commissioning a piece to help her process the loss of her mother. "I don't understand," Penny stammered. "What is all this?" I smiled, my hands still covered in clay. "This is what happened when I stopped running from my pain and started transforming it into something beautiful." The studio that had been my refuge from heartbreak had become a destination for healing. My story of betrayal and renewal had resonated with thousands of people, turning my cousin's forgotten pottery shed into a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to rebuild their lives. Blake and Jessica eventually married 6 months later, but their union lasted less than a year before ending in a bitter divorce involving accusations of financial infidelity and emotional abuse. Blake's reputation in Nashville's business community never recovered from the scandal, and he was forced to relocate to another state to restart his career. Jessica lost most of her mutual friends after the truth about her pattern of manipulative behavior became widely known. As I watched the steady stream of people finding hope and healing through clay, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you never knew you needed. And sometimes, the most beautiful revenge is simply becoming so magnificently yourself that you forget you ever needed revenge at all.